Well, let me begin by welcoming you here to Classic 107, Tasmin Little. It's an absolute pleasure to have you in Winnipeg.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Well, I understand this is your first visit here to the city.
It is, and I absolutely love it so far. I've woken up to some sunshine and, some snow, but that's okay. I was expecting that.
Well, I'd like to begin by going back to the very beginning. You grew up in London. Your father is an actor. Do you feel like you were destined for show business in any way?
Gosh, I don't know about destined, but certainly it was not anything that was peculiar or new. So obviously I grew up with my sister in a household that was very musical because my father was appearing in a lot of West End musical shows. Yeah. And also, treading the boards, walking out on stage in front of a lot of people was not something that was strange in our household. So from that point of view, it held no fears. But of course, being a musician is a slightly different animal to being an actor. The nature of the work is quite different. And, you don't tend to do a great long run somewhere like one would in a theatre production. There's a lot more travelling around, a lot more meeting of different people, a lot less time to get to know people. But what's quite interesting from that point of view is that I think that a lot of musicians are really instinctive people. We're quick to get to know each other. We have to get to work together really quickly and make a performance from just only a few rehearsals, or perhaps even only just one or two.
Oh, I mean, you've really summed it up. I guess there are some differences, and for you cut your teeth. You learned at the Yehudi Menuhin School. What was that opportunity like? You were there for some formative years, about a decade, is that right?
Absolutely. I went when I was only just 8 and left when I was 18. And the thing was that I had started to play the violin at my local primary school, and I was given a fantastic 15 minutes a week of violin tuition.
Overwhelming amount of
time. But actually, I made such quick progress that then I was given half an hour a week. And my violin teacher, who was a very lovely man, he said after just about 6 months, he said to my mum that he felt that I actually had so much potential that it was important that I should receive some really specialised music tuition. So he put me in for an audition at the Yehudi Menuhin School, and I really had no idea. I was only 7. I had no idea at all of the huge huge quantity of people who were going up for this audition, 300 international applicants. Wow. For 8 places. And I'd only been learning less than a year. So I'm glad I didn't know that before I went for the audition, because I think I might have been.
Ignorance is bliss.
Exactly, that's right.
Was he around much when you were there?
Yeah, he would come several times a year, and he would hear every single one of us. And he, no matter what stage you were at, so even though I was only 8 and, sometimes playing quite basic pieces, or even playing him a scale or a study, he would take as much interest in the 8-year-old as he would in the 18-year-old. So he was a really amazing man and always very encouraging. And I think when you remember that at that point in time, he was still a very, very busy touring concert musician, as well as everything else that he was doing on a sort of humanitarian level, I think it was incredible that he chose to spend so many days of his year at the school.
Well, I want to talk about that humanitarian aspect, in that with the school, in past interviews that I've read, it wasn't just so much about shaping you as a musician, playing your scales and establishing your tone and your technique, but also the idea of collaborating, of chamber music, of reaching out to your fellow musicians and the audience.
Absolutely. And not only just the audience, but the wider community as well, because of course he began something called Live Music Now, which is when musicians go into the community, into prisons and hospices and places like that. And so, he was a great man as well as a great musician. And I think that he really influenced all of us at the school from that point of view. And in fact, we would go into some very interesting places. When I was 18 years old, I crawled along a coal mine pit face for a quarter of a month. Yeah. So we went to play in Thurcroft at the colliery there. And they thought that it was an important part of our education to learn what it was like to be a miner. Wow. And so, things like that that, they don't leave you. Having an experience like that, I think is really important as a person, that you don't just get cocooned in your little bubble of classical music and just surround yourself with all this beautiful art. I think it's very important that you learn more about literally the grit of life as well. And so I think that all of us at the Yehudi Menuhin School were very fortunate to have this influence of somebody who was so broad-minded.
And you've kept that aspect of your career up and active. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is the naked violin.
Absolutely.
How can we not mention this groundbreaking idea? It came out 10 years ago.
Yes, in
2008.
fact, that's exactly right. It's the 10th anniversary this year. And what I keep on sort of pinching myself about is that when I began this project, YouTube was in its entire infancy. It is quite extraordinary what has happened in the last 10 years. So the quantity and sheer breadth of what you have now on YouTube was simply not there. So I had letters from all over the world, a lot of letters from China, from people who said that this was the first access that they had to proper classical music. And I mean, I think that there were a lot of sort of illegal recordings and a lot of bootlegging going on in China just because they didn't have credit cards at that time, so they couldn't buy things on the internet. And so these letters were really very meaningful from people who appreciated the classical music so much. And then, of course, I went into the community and had some quite fantastic experiences in all sorts of interesting places where they have centres for people with communication disabilities, and many hospices and prisons, and just so many different experiences. And it's something that I feel very grateful for as well, because at every point in time it reminded me that classical music can reach absolutely everybody, and that I think it's very tempting for particularly sometimes politicians to go, oh well, you need to be a certain kind of person with a certain kind of background to enjoy classical music, and that is just nonsense. I've had far too many experiences where it's completely clear that classical music can reach anybody.
And it's because to me at least, it's because it communicates in so many different ways. We don't have to listen just for the technical. It can appeal very immediately on an emotional connection.
That's exactly it. I mean, I think, in fact, in a way, that is its primary first connection with people, because children are not going to appreciate it necessarily intellectually. Babies and very, very young toddlers really can respond to music, and they are doing it on a very instinctive, emotional level. But obviously, as you get older and you can appreciate the demands of what's been made upon a musician and how they are playing something technically. And then, of course, the intellectual aspect that the composer would bring. I mean, you've just been playing some Bach earlier today, which, he was a great composer from a point of view of a theoretical aspect and a mathematical aspect to his music. But of course, it's emotional music too.
So for listeners that don't know, I should say the Naked Violin was and is a free download. It's still right there up on your website, and it features spoken introductions before the works. It gives people a chance to really get a grasp on what they're about to hear and to make that connection. And it's curious that you mentioned that, YouTube wasn't what it was. The social media as a whole isn't what it is today. Yeah. I'm curious, do you think you would have approached it in the same way if you were releasing the same series in 2018 as 2008? Or would it be like a YouTube series or a podcast? Would there be Instagram stories or something like that?
I think probably, yes, I would, of course, have approached it in a different way.
Yeah.
I had what was available at the time, and even Wi-Fi wasn't what it is now.
It's true. We take it for granted.
We do take it for granted, and we forget the whole process that led up to that facility that now most of us are able to tap into. So yeah, definitely I would have approached it in a different way. But actually, one thing that I did do that I was able to do, but I had to go into a studio to do it, because of course there were no iPads or anything like that. I did do a live webcast.
Oh, really?
And I took questions, and people would type in their questions to the studio, and I would answer them live. So, so that was just incredibly formative stuff. So it really was quite cutting edge and groundbreaking in its time.
And it speaks again to that communicative humanity aspect of music and just making connections. For listeners just tuning in, my name is Simon Rusnak, and I'm speaking with renowned violinist Tasmin Little. You're not only a prolific performing artist, but also a prolific recording artist. And you haven't just recorded the core works like the Bruch, like the Dvorak, like the Brahms, like the Sibelius, but also lesser-known composers like Polish composers like Karłowicz. Actually, I just played your recording yesterday.
Thank you, and beautiful pronunciation.
Oh,
yes,
well, thanks very
wonderful.
much. But not just the Polish composers, but of course British composers as well, long associated with Delius, and you've delighted audiences and reintroduced them to this broader aspect of the repertoire. What does that mean to you as a performer?
I think as I began my career, I was quite astounded at the lack of opportunity to play great British works. And my father grew up in Bradford, and he was born within a mile of Delius's own birthplace. And I mean, whether it was because of that or whether just he loved the music, I grew up in a household where there was an enormous range of music on offer for me to listen to. And some of these unusual works, in fact, even the Benjamin Britten, I grew up listening to that because my father and my mother loved to explore different works and different areas of the repertoire, not just violin, but other areas as well, orchestral and chamber music. So as I began my career, I wanted to try to change that and try to bring into the concert hall some of the more neglected areas of the repertoire. And obviously British repertoire was a big part of that, but other repertoire and also new contemporary repertoire, because at that point in time, not many people were taking an interest, really active interest in contemporary music. So I did quite a lot of premieres of violin concertos and things. So it was very important to me because I felt that I didn't just want to play standard repertoire, important, essential though that is to me. I wanted to have a broader range of repertoire, and I wanted to give people an opportunity to experience that in the concert hall. So I've actually probably made that a real bedrock of my career. But I have always wished to balance that as well with the great core areas of the repertoire. I couldn't possibly survive without playing Brahms and Schubert and Bach and Mozart. So I've at every stage during recording and also in concert performances, I've always balanced that. That's been in the forefront of my mind as well.
Well, talking about past concert performances, just yesterday, our Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra music director Daniel Reiskin was co-hosting with Michael Walsh on Morning Light, and he mentioned that he actually was at one of your performances in London, the Britten Double Concerto. Do you remember that? Did you meet each other?
We did, and he came backstage afterwards, and I was playing with a wonderful viola player, Lars Anders Tomter, and I gather that Daniel gave many performances of this particular work. So so I'm thrilled that Britten is such a hugely important composer to Daniel. I think it's he is one of our most important composers, in terms of just the breadth of what he did, but also I think other composers who've been influenced by Benjamin Britten's works. So I think he has to rate as really one of the absolute top British composers that we have.
And it's funny the way the world works, but here you are both performing music of Britten in tomorrow's concert, the WSO with you, Tasmin Little, led by Daniel Reiskin. Yay! It's funny how it all, something about 6 degrees of separation. We don't quite have that many, I really don't think. So tomorrow's performance, you're going to be performing Benjamin Britten's Sublime Violin Concerto. What can you tell us about the work?
Well, this work was actually written when Benjamin Britten was living in North America. In fact, he was living in Canada, and he was a conscientious objector. And I think that one of the things that is always leaps out at me is the struggle in this violin concerto, because on the one hand you get the feeling of nostalgia for his country, but also for days gone by. And underneath that, you've got this looming march of war, and it's present from the very opening bars of the timpani, and it's like an omen of terrible things to come. The first movement is this beautiful, lyrical, sublime theme that gets that really evolves and is absolutely gorgeous. But then, of course, there's the contrast of this very rhythmic march-like "let's go to war" kind of theme. The second movement for me really is about the battle, and it's incredibly exciting. It's violent, it's overwhelming, and it culminates in a fantastic and very powerful cadenza for solo violin that then leads into Passacaglia, which for me is like a kind of funeral march idea for the dead. But from this, a little bit phoenix-like from the ashes, grows another idea that takes us back to some nostalgia, and then and perhaps a feeling of triumph even through the terrible devastation. And the piece ends in one of the most extraordinary ways of any violin concerto that is in the repertoire, and it ends with an open chord in the woodwind and the brass, and the violin oscillates between the major and the minor, almost as if even now he cannot make up his mind. And it is really an extraordinary piece of music, very powerful, quite overwhelming, cataclysmic. For those people who might not know it, I urge them to either to come tomorrow or on Saturday and really experience one of the great violin concertos.
It will be a powerful program. I mean, there is the Britain, there's also the Shostakovich and the Ravel. This is a concert in remembrance, November 9th and 10th. What does it mean to be performing this music to you in the centenary year of the armistice and the conclusion of the First World War?
Obviously, it has an even more profound meaning, and to do it literally at this point in time. We are coming up to November the 11th, and here we are 100 years on, and I think we just can't help but be aware of of so many things. I feel I'm very fortunate travelling around the planet and playing beautiful music, but I go into communities where, struggles continue to exist. And, one can't help but feel, gosh, here we are 100 years later, and what has changed? We've changed a lot in terms of technology, but there's a lot of things that still remain in terms of our necessity as a society to find a more peaceful way ahead.
And music has such a way to express and challenge those adversarial aspects. Well, Tasmin Little, thank you so much for coming by Classic 107. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you, and likewise.
You can see Tasmin Little performing with our very own Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra under the direction of Daniel Reiskin. Tomorrow, Friday, November 9th at 7:30 p.m. Another concert on Saturday, 7:30. For more information, visit wso.ca.